Hello, this is Mayor Chris Bollwage, and welcome to another edition of Our City. If you're looking for any information regarding the City of Elizabeth, stay connected on our social media platforms or call our public information office at 908-820-4124. And keeping with this year's shows, we're talking about America's 250th. My special guest is Mr. Robert Gula, who is a trustee of the Forgotten Victory Trail Association and the vice president of the National Society and Sons of the American Revolution, who has a fascinating opening to us. I wanted to talk about what we talked about before we went on the air, how you got involved in the history, not only of your family, but also of the country.
Well, 3 out of my 4 grandparents were Eastern Bloc European, so Polish. And the one grandmother who was not, she would always say to me, "You're Irish." I would always say, "Okay, where are we from?" She'd say, "Tipperary, County Tipperary, Ireland." And when I retired about 12 years ago, I decided I would dig into what our roots were. And of course, her mom was Irish, but her dad, whose surname was Beach, was one of the founding families of Newark. And so the Beaches go way back to the Plantagenet Kings of England, the Mayflower. So it opened up a Pandora's box, and I found myself going down rabbit
This on
holes.
your mother's side or your father's
This
side?
is
the grandparents?
paternal. This is my dad's side,
Okay.
his mother.
His mother.
And so her dad was a Beach, and the Beaches go way back. Wow. And it's particularly with regard to Newark and Elizabeth.
There's also a Senator Beach, by the way, hails from South Jersey.
Oh, yeah?
Jim Beach, yes.
Yeah, it might be a relative. Who knows?
Is it Beach?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, so that's a fascinating opening part of your history, and you then branched out and got more and more involved, right? You now.
So I joined all the organizations. I joined Sons of the American Revolution, I'm in the color guard, which is why I'm wearing this uniform. I also joined Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, which is another hereditary organization focused on Civil War ancestry. And I joined the Mayflower Society.
So the North or the South? I should ask that.
North,
North,
the Union,
okay.
Sons of Union Veterans,
Okay.
yeah. I did have some Confederates in the mix, though, believe it or
Everybody
not.
did, right? That's from what I read.
Yes.
Everybody did.
Yeah.
It was brother against brother,
Yeah.
father against son.
I think my wife's ancestry is James Longstreet,
Oh.
who
yeah.
a lot of
South,
Civil War
yeah.
historians would say, based on what happened at Gettysburg, that he was kind of Union
Right.
because he failed at Gettysburg for the Confederate side. And afterwards, he became a Republican, which the South didn't like.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm familiar with the other organ, but I never heard of the Victory Trail Association. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the Forgotten Victory Trail Association, we started it about 5 years ago. And we did it because if you look around the areas that we live in, I live in Short Hills, not far from here. And originally all of that was Springfield and was also a part of Newark and Elizabeth before they incorporated separate towns. And there's so much history there that the people that live there don't realize is in their backyards. And there's no battlefields. There's no open battlefields like Trenton, Princeton, Monmouth. Those have open battlefields. They have visitor centers. We don't have that. But the battles of Springfield and Connecticut Farms, which took place very close by, with Elizabeth being the pass-through for British troops, they're unmarked. I mean, there's plaques here and there, but we don't have battlefields, so people don't see what was there.
We have a sign on Elizabeth Avenue, now that you mentioned it, that says the route of the last invasion.
Yes, yes.
Which is coming from Staten Island up. It was called Water Street back then. It was not called Elizabeth Avenue.
Right. So much of it is densely populated, urbanized. So you can't get a sense of what was here. It was orchards, it was fields, it was beautiful country. I mean, Connecticut Farms, which is Union today, was referred, I think, by George Washington as the Garden of Eden of New Jersey. It was so beautiful.
Hence the Garden State, right?
Yeah.
So Your historical knowledge is fascinating, and as we all know, Elizabethtown was a major part of the Revolution, especially with the spying back and forth between Staten Island and the Patriots here. What do you think the most significant contribution was from this area, besides the battles we just talked about?
Well, Elizabeth was militarily, economically important. It was very close to where the British stronghold was. So during the war, the British from the summer of 1776 till the end of the war occupied New York City. Troops were stationed on Staten Island. So it was so close across the Arthur Kill that there would be frequent foraging done by British soldiers. I mean, they lacked food for their horses, for their men, so periodically they would forage in these areas. So Elizabeth would see considerable activity, not only from the British, but also amongst the citizens. So in some ways it was a civil war. We often hear historians say, well, 1/3 of the population was patriot, 1/3 was loyalist, and 1/3 was neutral, just trying to stay out of the fray. And depending on where you lived, it might be more patriotic if it's a Presbyterian town. It might be more loyalist if it's an Anglican community. But Elizabeth had political leaders, military leaders for the patriot cause here. And they were heavily involved with Washington in his campaigns, in the Battle of Springfield, Battle of Connecticut Farms. So I think it was the fact that it was this hub of economic activity. The London trade went on, even though it was illegal, which is just trade with the British, which was outlawed during this period. People would still conduct it. They would need to make a living.
Because of our geography, I guess.
Because of your geography on the coast. And it was also the path that the British would have to take if they went and sought out George Washington and his troops, because they were for 2 winters at least encamped at Morristown. The most devastating of those was the 1779-1780 encampment in Morristown, which was a terrible winter, and the troops suffered greatly. And the British, this would be their path through Elizabeth to get out to
it's
Morristown.
interesting. I mean, the third president of the country under the Articles of Confederation was from Elizabeth, Elias Boudinot. And so when you say we had a lot of patriot leaders, the Presbyterian churches are still here.
Yeah.
And we don't have any Anglican churches now. I don't know if we did back then, but I imagine
You
we
did.
did.
You did. And the Reverend Caldwell, who ran the first Presbyterian church here, which
Right,
the
which is
British,
still here.
which the British would end up burning the original one down. He was an adversary of the leader of the Anglican congregation across the street. I think it's the Trinity Church that's across the
Oh,
street.
yeah, St. John's. I guess that was
Yeah.
Okay, that church is still here. Yeah.
So, but your point about Elias Boudinot, it's interesting because there are some historians that would argue that he was the first president of the United States, simply because he was president of the Continental Congress during the Treaty of Paris getting signed, which is when we were recognized internationally, at least, as a country.
Okay.
So some would say, okay, he was in office as president then of what was the Continental Congress. He was president of the then recognized United States.
Right.
So.
Which was the first time we were recognized, is
Yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah.
So the title Gateway to the Revolution is basically, how is that bestowed on us? Is there an author to that?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't either.
It's just like Morristown is often referred to as the military capital of the Revolution. New Jersey's the cockpit of the Revolution, or the crossroads of the Revolution. So I don't know how the moniker came about, but it certainly was because of its location geographically right at the gateway.
Right.
And it would suffer considerable devastation during the war. I mean, Elizabeth would see, like I was telling you, foraging raids,
right.
Burning of the town, and in some ways the Civil War aspects were a big part too, because you didn't know if your neighbor was a patriot or a loyalist in many cases. And you had people like Cornelius Hatfield Jr.
We have a street named after him.
Cornelius Hatfield Jr. was a loyalist. His dad, Sr., was a patriot.
Like Ben Franklin.
And Cornelius Jr. would end up aiding the British in burning down his own church, the First Presbyterian
didn't know
Church. Now his dad was a wealthy and devout patriot. He would help rebuild that church. The father would.
I didn't know that story.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, similar to Ben Franklin, the son was the governor.
Oh yeah.
Right?
So yeah, William Franklin, and he would play a big part in all of these invasions. We talk about 2 invasions happening through Elizabeth out towards Hobart Gap and Springfield, Connecticut, Battle of Connecticut Farms, Battle of Springfield, and now I lost my train of thought.
Well, I'm going to help you here. The Hobart Gap, you live up that way.
I
actually.
do. I do.
So,
I live on Hobart Avenue.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Oh, wow. So I'm fascinated when I go to the Short Hills Mall and see there's an exit there.
Yeah. That was.
And people say, what is that? And I say, well, actually, it goes back to the Revolution.
Yeah, there were 2 ways the British could get through the Watchung Mountain Range. One was the Mordecai Gap, which is down near Metuchen, South Plainfield, down that way. And that was one gap. And the other was Hobart Gap. And the British would evaluate whether or not they would take that risk. They would test Washington on occasion, and they would test it seriously in January of 1780 when they came and they raided Elizabeth and they burned the academy.
That's an important chapter, right? 1780?
Yeah, so January of 1780, it all starts out with Washington. One of his officers is William Alexander, Lord Stirling. And they come up with a plan to take 500 sleds.
We had a bar named Lord Stirling here for years. It's not here
Well,
anymore.
that could be the other Lord Stirling who was injured here in Elizabethtown on the British side.
Okay.
But William Alexander, Lord Stirling, and Washington came up with this plan that they were going to attack the troops on Staten Island. And they would do it covertly in January, I think about January 15th, 1780. They would take 500 sleds from Morristown. Now remember, the winter of 1780 was terrible. 26 snowstorms, 6 blizzards. So it was tough to travel, but they took 500 sleds with about 2,000 men and made their way to Staten Island, crossed over through Elizabeth, over the Arthur Kill, and unfortunately, the British had gotten word of it and were not surprised and defended their encampment, and the poor soldiers under Lord Stirling were suffering in the cold with sub-zero temperatures. But that was the first attempt by the Patriots. In retaliation, the British would raid Elizabeth, and that's when they burned the Presbyterian Church, the Academy, with the help of...
Is that when Caldwell died at that period?
No, that was June. So they would follow this up after these raids of Elizabeth in January. The British would follow it up about 5 months later with a massive invasion, the first being Connecticut Farms. And that's when they made it all the way out to the border of Springfield and Union. And that's when they murdered Hannah Caldwell.
And they were stopped right after that, though, right?
They were stopped on that first foray, and that first foray was triggered by, you were talking about William Franklin, son of Benjamin Franklin. Well, William Franklin, he was the last royal governor of New Jersey. He was very antagonistic of the British military. He was a loyalist. He felt that they should go and attack Washington, go out to Morristown. So he ends up in the ear of Kniphausen. He's in charge of troops in New York City. And he convinces Kniphausen that now's the time to attack. It's been a terrible winter.
Was he a Hessian?
He was a Hessian, yeah. So they end up attacking at Connecticut Farms June 7th, and then they'll follow up 2 weeks later when Henry Clinton, who's the commanding officer of all of North American British troops, he comes back from Charleston and hears that the first attempt failed by Kniphausen. He's not happy about that, but they decide they'll try again, and they try a 2-prong attack. This time they go up what's today Morris Avenue, and then the other prong of it goes up Vauxhall Road.
Okay. You talked about some military heroes from this area. Are there others?
Yeah, well, you had a number of families who had Continental officers. So you had the Daytons, the Ogdens, the Cranes, just to name a few. There are others.
We have streets named after all those
Yeah,
people.
Yeah. Well, those were families with deep history here. And they would serve General Washington in a number of his campaigns and certainly out at Battle of Springfield and Connecticut farms.
So I believe Jonathan Dayton is buried underneath the church in the city of Elizabeth.
That I'm not sure of, but,
Yeah.
but Elias Dayton he was the commanding officer of the 3rd New Jersey. And this uniform I'm wearing is the Jersey Blues
Okay.
original uniform, and that was Elias Dayton's company.
Jonathan was a signer, though, right?
Yes.
Okay, I think
Yes.
he's the I think he's buried underneath that
Yeah,
St. John's Church.
I'm not sure.
I have to check it again, but
But I did find that
folklore has that anyway.
going down my rabbit holes, looking at my family history, I did come across something interesting. I belong to Canoe Brook Country Club,
Okay.
which is just past the Hobart Gap.
Right.
And I said to myself, okay, this was probably where Washington's troops would encamp, there or around Chatham, in the staging area leading up to going through the Gap to face off against the British. It ends up Canoe Brook was owned by Elias Dayton, the south course of Canoe Brook Country Club. He owned it from, I want to say, the 1770s up through early 1800s. And he had a farmhouse out there. It was kind of like his vacation home, if you will. And there was an episode, and this is really intriguing. After Yorktown, which was presumably the end of the war, and they started negotiating for the Treaty of Paris, but several things happened down the Jersey Shore. The British loyalists down at the Jersey Shore didn't give up, even after the loss at Yorktown. So they continued raids. There continued to be fighting down the Jersey Shore, one of which was the Toms River Blockhouse raid, where a number of loyalists attack the blockhouse. They capture Joshua Huddy, who's a captain in the militia. They take him, and they know at this point that the British, the French, and the English are negotiating peace. But they're still going and doing these raids because the war isn't over for them. They take Joshua Huddy and they string him up. They hang him. Washington gets word of that, decides he's going to take a British prisoner, and that British prisoner was out in Chatham. Now, he ends up instructing Elias Dayton to put him up in his home. He puts him up in his home that's on Canoe Brook Country Club land.
Really?
It was torn down when they put Route 24 in. But the fact that Washington wanted to put this British prisoner to death caused an international affair, because you had the parents of this affluent British officer petitioning the French king on behalf of them to go to the Congress and say, don't hang my son. So it holds up the whole peace negotiation. And he's housed out at what's today Canoe Brook. And eventually they do agree, Congress and George Washington agree that he won't be put to death.
And it wasn't like you could send a text. It probably took
It took a
months.
while.
Yeah,
It took a
right.
while, but
Exactly.
people don't realize, I guess my point being, one, fighting and activities continued after Yorktown, and Jersey was a hotbed of it. The last land battle in the Revolution was in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. It was called Cedar Bridge. But these affairs afterwards are important to remember, and you can visit them today if you go down the Jersey Shore. But secondly, we have things in our backyard, like Canoe Brook Country Club,
right.
which served as the prison for this British soldier.
Are there any black soldiers and women who played a role?
Yeah.
Are their names known?
Yeah, there are. I have a bunch of them, and I have them here on my list. But I mean, the ones that come to mind are certainly enslaved men who participated as patriots. Cato and Caesar are the names that people might recognize. Keep in mind that if you were a enslaved black during this time, you would have to make a tough decision. And that tough decision was the British were creating incentives for them to come over to their side and fight, pledge loyalty to the king, and serve as a British soldier in return for their freedom. So that was incenting them to do that. At the same time, you had the Declaration of Independence being issued, which said, as a vision or as a promise, all men are created equal.
Yeah.
So which one do you go with? Do you side with the British and perhaps get your freedom, but if they lose, you don't? They would, in turn, give people land after the war. So the British would give you land in Canada if you served in the British forces. And a lot of loyalists would bail from New Jersey and go up to Canada. But Cato, Caesar, and then there was some other officers, William Stives, Oliver Cromwell is an interesting one. Not the Oliver
Not
Cromwell
the-
we think
Yeah,
of,
that's
but Oliver Cromwell, I believe
he was long gone by then.
he served, and he was injured in one of the battles during the Revolution, and at the end of the war, he received what was the precursor to the Purple Heart. It was the Badge of Merit from George Washington.
Okay.
Now, some of these individuals lived in Elizabeth, some of these black soldiers. Others spent time either on guard duty or in militia duty here.
So earlier you mentioned that life went on. Ordinary citizens, you talked about trade, you talked about that. What do you think daily life was like in a hotbed of spying and
A lot of unknowns.
Right.
And also remember, there were two times where the British actually occupied Elizabeth, and it was under their rule, if you will. The first time was the winter of 1776 into 1777. Now that's after they had seized New York, won the Battle of Long Island. So they control Elizabeth for that winter. And then they will again rule Elizabeth for a short period in June of 1780. And I think the people at that point a lot of them would have packed up their goods and gone west. We hear a lot about people just fleeing with their valuables or burying their valuables and moving west to be with.
well, there's a town up in North Jersey called Ogdenburg.
Yeah,
And
Ogdensburg.
that was the Ogdens from here that relocated their family to stay
Yep.
away from there's a mill up there, it's not functioning any longer.
That's right. Well, my Talmadge ancestors from Elizabeth ended up in Ogdensburg because the Ogdens moved out there during the Revolution. But I guess what I'm saying is a lot of them would choose to flee to escape potential British foraging or potential British capture.
So, some known facts about Elizabethtown during the Revolution. How about some lesser known facts? You talked about a couple.
Well, we talked about the fact that Elias Boudinot
Right.
could technically have been the first president of the recognized United States. I mean, there was about 1,200 people living here. The other thing, so it was the largest city in New Jersey at the time.
At 1,200.
At 1,200. The other thing that I would say is that you did have Alexander Hamilton, who went to the Academy.
Right. Aaron Burr as well.
Yeah, Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr, I think, was a little bit ahead of him at the Academy. But the other thing, and I had this in my notes. So, interestingly enough, and people probably know some of this, but George Washington was here repeatedly during the Revolution. He would have passed through here during his retreat from New York in 1776. He would have come through here. Eventually, would end up crossing the Delaware into Pennsylvania, and then back across during the battles that are the 10 crucial days. But he would also come here for a wedding in 1778. And then he would make a return trip on the way to his inauguration in 1789.
Do you know the wedding?
The wedding was, and I have this in my notes,
Because I didn't know he actually came here. I mean,
the
I know he-
Boudinots. It was I think it was a Boudinot's brother. I think it was a brother of Elias, perhaps, or a sister of Elias who got married. And there were a number of notable people here. I think Lafayette had come to that wedding.
Lafayette definitely came here.
He definitely was through here, but
He also came through here, I believe, towards his farewell tour.
yeah.
And George Washington had lunch here on March 1st, 1789.
Yes, on his way to his inauguration.
Yeah.
Yeah. So George Washington
Did
was
you
here.
have any of this knowledge while you were working in
No.
New York? No.
No.
You've acquired all of this
Yeah.
knowledge since you retired.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I mean, the other fun facts are Reverend Caldwell, as you mentioned, Hannah Caldwell, had been murdered at the Battle of Connecticut Farms. Her husband, Reverend Caldwell, who was a very fervent patriot, who would sermonize, here in Elizabeth, and he would come to the pulpit. Keep in mind, he was quartermaster for the 3rd New Jersey Continental Regiment in his part-time
He'd wear
job.
that in the pulpit?
So he would come to the pulpit with his 2 revolvers, and rumor has it that he would just slam them on the pulpit, and then he would go into a fiery sermon about, independence and freedom and natural rights and all the things that enlightened Presbyterian ministers would talk about. But Reverend Caldwell's important also because he would end up being murdered himself in Elizabeth a year after his wife was murdered by the British in Connecticut farms. A sentry, he was
visiting prisoners, right?
Yeah, he was visiting, and I think he was in the accompanying a young lady, and one of the American sentries shot him dead. We're not sure if that sentry was in the payroll of the British, whether he was a spy.
Shot in the back, right?
Yeah, so both of them were martyred in the Patriot cause, and 9 children became orphans, one of which would end up being adopted by Lafayette and raised to adulthood.
Hence the name Caldwell, New Jersey.
Yes,
Right.
Caldwell, New Jersey. And Caldwell Place out in Union.
We have one here
Which
too.
is right near the
right next to the
parsonage.
church.
Yeah, I can't overstate the importance of Reverend Caldwell and his fervent patriotism for the people in this town, and then the people of Connecticut Farms in Springfield.
So as we wrap up, besides talking to you, who else and where can people go to get information? Because I find your conversation fascinating.
Yeah, well, I think you could start with Go Elizabeth, New Jersey 250, which is the organization established here to help celebrate the 250th. They have a wonderful website. They have interesting timelines, historical places you can visit. They're also kicking things off with the grand opening of their Welcome Center, which is going to be at the Central Line train
Used
station.
to be a train station, right?
Yeah, they're going to do that on May 29th. I would say go there. And then certainly go to our website, forgottenvictory.com. We have everything from profiles on people in the Revolution, local people, places, battles. We have an interactive map, a very cool interactive map where you could see all of these sites from Elizabeth all the way out to Morristown.
Bob, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule
I
to join us
appreciate
on
it.
this show.
I
I was
appreciate it.
fascinated by your knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank Mr. Bob Gula for coming here today to talk about Elizabeth's 250 as well as the nation's 250th, and look forward to spending more time with other guests this year talking about Elizabeth and New Jersey and the 250th anniversary. This is Chris Bollwage. We'll see you next week on another edition of Our City.